Ladies and gentlemen, friends, we're going through many experiments in these 25 years of Blaues Haus, and this is one this morning, another one. I want to welcome Klaus Hillenbrand, who came in from Berlin. I don't know, how would you explain the Taz to an American?
A liberal daily newspaper.
Very liberal?
Very liberal.
Very liberal. TAZ, it's spelled TAZ, Taz. And you're in the upper leading level?
I'm a pensioner now, since a few months.
Okay, so the former. That's very helpful and very nice. I think that you approached the Blaues Haus with the question if we know any members of the Eisemann family. And then you got into touch with some of the Eisemann family members who are here today. And since they said they would come, we thought it's a unique situation for you to learn about the research that Klaus Hillenbrand has done, because the book is in German. We have a couple of copies to buy. The reason is also to get together and to have Mike Bock, who we are very grateful to document the lecture. So, for example, Michelle in Japan, her daughter in Hong Kong, other members can then listen to it and get the information or the core information that is collected in this book, Das Amulett und das Mädchen. I also want to welcome a couple of Israeli guests coming with Friedel and Ari to listen to the lecture, and our very dear Beirat consultant François Loeb came in from Freiburg. Many don't know him maybe, but we're very grateful that he's here. Uli Trom is here from Lörrach, doing research on many families, and he will take our guests Carol and Sepp this afternoon to continue research in Lörrach. So thank you all for being here this morning. I asked Klaus Hillenbrand in preparing this morning if there's any picture of Karolina, because Karolina Cohn, and her mother was a sister of Michael Eisemann, Else, and he said there is one of the family which I will pass around now. And as you see, she's probably a little younger than little Ella, but here's she with her parents. And this is another brother of Michael, and these are relatives from, yeah, you pass it, take. But you get it also digital. So thank you very much, Klaus, and here's the floor.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very glad to be here. Thank you that you all have come here now. And as you know, I'll talk in English today, because we have so many guests from all over the world here that they understand English but not German. And I apologize for all those who don't speak English too good and maybe don't understand everything, but it's the only possibility to do that in English. So kein Deutsch heute Morgen hier bitte. I'll talk about a teenage girl. Okay, I will talk about a teenage girl from Frankfurt am Main in Germany. Her birthday was July 3rd in the year 1929. That means she would have been alive today if she would have been alive today. Karolina, that is the name of the girl, would become 94 years the day after tomorrow. Maybe she would live in an old people's home near the Main in Frankfurt. Maybe she would talk about her youth 80 years ago and drink a glass of champagne. But Karolina won't drink neither water nor champagne. She's dead since more than 80 years now, murdered by the Nazis. Karolina was a relative of the Eisemann family in Breisach. She lived in Frankfurt with her family, and here's her story and how I picked it up. 1.5 million children were killed by the Nazis during the Holocaust. Karolina is just one of these 1.5 million. I didn't know her, and I'm quite sure that there was nobody left all over the world who remembered her name, Karolina Cohn. Why do people remember her today? I was working as a head of the news department of a German daily newspaper in January 2017 in Berlin. It's part of the job to look on all the news cables which come from different agencies during the day. These are about 2,000 cables daily. It's a job full of stress without any breaks. It was January 17th, 2017, around 1:30 p.m. when I read the news from the American agency Associated Press, in short AP. And that's what it said. Jerusalem AP, during excavations in the former Nazi death camp Sobibor, researchers have found personal jewelry belonging to Holocaust victims. Among the finds was a pendant that probably belonged to a girl from Frankfurt, the Israeli Holocaust Memorial Yad Vashem announced on Sunday. On one side of the triangular tag are the words Mazel Tov, congratulations in Hebrew, and the date of the birth, July 3rd, 1929, and the location, Frankfurt am Main. On the other side, you can see the Hebrew letter Hey, which also symbolizes God, as well as 3 small stars of David. Yad Vashem believes the pendant belonged to a girl named Karolina Cohn. He is very similar to a follower of the Jewish girl Anne Frank, who was murdered in the Bergen-Belsen concentration camp and became world famous through her diary. Cohn and Frank were born in Frankfurt in the same year and may be related, the statement said. I looked on the homepage of Yad Vashem, and it was asked for further information about the case. That was the moment when I decided to start a research about Karolina. I wanted to find out more. What research means, in the end, the result could be nothing. In the end, the result could be a short notice. It could be an article in the newspaper. And in that case, it was this book in the end, which was a result of all this research. I won't bother you with all the details and difficulties to do research about a young woman who has lived 85 years ago. Just this. It was a long trip which brought me to different archives all over Germany, in the US and in Israel. I went to Tel Aviv and met there a very old lady who also had a pendant like Karolina, with her birthday shown. Friends of mine published calls in the Hebrew-German Tel Aviv magazine Yakinton and asked for anybody who remembered Karolina Cohn in Frankfurt. But nobody answered. I traveled to Poland and walked over the side of the death camp Sobibor and visited Majdanek concentration camp. I spoke to the experts who restored those items which I found in Sobibor death camp. I met the archaeologists Yoram Haimi in Israel and Wojciech in Poland, who helped me a lot. I traveled to Minsk in Belarus and saw the site of the former Jewish ghetto, spoke to dissidents of the regime and visited Mali Trostinets, a death camp near Minsk. And many times I visited Frankfurt, the hometown of Karolina, which I know very well because my parents come from that town. My mother, Ingeborg, used to live only 200 meters away from the home of Karolina's family in the North End quarter, Tomasius Street number 10 in the 1930s. Tomasius Street number 10, that was the address of Karolina when she grew up. In Jerusalem, the genealogist Chaim Motzen read the same text on the homepage of Yad Vashem about Karolina Cohn. He also decided to start a research. Chaim was looking for family members of Karolina, not only those from the 1930s and 1940s, but also from today. Later, we came together, met in Jerusalem, and exchanged our information. So this is what I learned. The pendant was given to all Jewish female babies born in Frankfurt in 1929 and 1930. It is not clear who did that. Maybe a rabbi, maybe the Jewish community of Frankfurt. That's why also Anne Frank, born 1929, the same year as Karolina Cohn, had such a pendant. But it seems highly unlikely that Anne Frank and Karolina have ever met in their lives. They lived in different quarters of the town. Anne's family was quite wealthy, Karolina's not. In fact, Karolina's family was very poor. They lived in a small apartment in a house which was destroyed during the Second World War in the air raids of the Allied forces. Also, all documents about this house were burned. But I found a very old man in Frankfurt who was a neighbor of Karolina at that time, more than 80 years ago, in that house. But he remembered not very much. Or he didn't like to remember not very much, I don't know. Before the Cohn family lived in Tomasius Street number 10, they had moved many times, possibly because they could not pay the rent. Karolina's father, Richard Cohn, born 1884, who was badly injured as a German soldier in World War I, and therefore he was handicapped. He was able to work, but not too hard and not too long. Her mother was Else, née Eisemann, 10 years younger than her husband, from the small town of Bad Orb, around 40 miles east of Frankfurt. And Karolina had a younger sister named Gitta. And further on, Karolina was Karolina and not Caroline at the end of Karolina. The Nazis, when they deported Karolina in 1941, made a mistake on the deportation list and named her Caroline instead of Karolina. And after that, everyone believed that the girl which was sent to death in the east of Europe was Karolina Cohn, but she wasn't. She was Karolina Cohn. I found that only out because I was looking for the birth certificate in Frankfurt, which was sent to me as a copy. When we look for the Eisemann family in Bad Orb, I think nearly everybody of us knows that, we learn that Karolina's grandfather, Salomon, and grandmother Gitta had 5 children. Moritz and Simon were working as butchers and had a joint butcher's shop in Bad Orb in the 1920s. Max became a merchant. Else, Karolina's mother, learned dressmaker. And there was Michael, born 1894, who studied in Würzburg and later became a cantor in Breisach. We do not know for sure how and where Else and Richard Cohn met for the first time, but it could have been the spa park of Bad Orb, where injured German soldiers like Richard were treated after the First World War.
By the way, do you have any recollections of Michael being an officer in the German army during the First World War?
Oh, I'm not aware. Sorry, I would have to look into my documents in Berlin. I don't know that for sure now.
That what I know from my father, that Ludwig, the son of Michael, was sent by Clara to Dachau with, allegedly, with Michael diploma and medal that he was awarded on the First World War to show to the Germans that he is a loyal citizen. So I don't know if this is true or a tale, but that was at least what was told to me by my father, because they want to relieve. Clara thought that they would give him less hardship.
Well, what's sure is that Michael was a member of the German army in the First World War. On the other side, what we know is that at that time there was lots of anti-Semitism in Germany already, so usually Jews couldn't become officers in the German army. There were altogether only around 2,000 Jews who became officers in the German army in the First World War.
So I may be mistaken, maybe a distinguished for his act or not necessarily for being an officer, but it was somehow related to the First World War.
Okay. I walked through the park of Bad Orb. It's a nice place, and I met the couple, which today lives in the former butcher's shop of Moritz and Simon. They showed me the pole where the meat used to hang 19 years ago. The home still has 2 entrance doors next to each other, one for the butcher shop and the other one for the home of the Eisemanns. When the Nazis gained power in Germany in 1933, Karolina's father Richard was without a job, like millions of Germans. In the Frankfurt address books, he was named as a merchant, although he was not. That's why he became an early victim of the Nazis. They published in 1934 a book with the names of all Jewish companies in Frankfurt and the call to boycott them. In reality, Richard was so poor that he had asked family members living in the United States for financial aid. It seems that he did not receive a single dollar from there. Karolina in Frankfurt grew up after the Nazis gained power. And also Jewish children were affected by the anti-Semitic politics of the Nazis. Karolina was not allowed to visit a public school because she was Jewish. She had to go into a Jewish school. The zoo of Frankfurt was very near to Karolina's home, but she was not allowed to enter it and see the elephants or the apes because she was Jewish. It was also forbidden to use a public swimming pool in Frankfurt for Jews because she was Jewish. In Bad Orb, Max Eisemann had left Germany already in 1929 for the United States and lived in New York City. His brother Simon still was the owner of the butcher's shop. In the first years of Nazi rule, it became more and more difficult for Simon and his family to survive. There was a boycott against Jewish companies. Many Jews left Bad Orb. It became more and more difficult for Simon. Simon and his wife Amalie sent 2 of her female children to the United States. The letters to father and mother from Germany to these children with the names Ida and Meta were kept, and we still have them. They are in these maps. These letters are not part of the book I wrote because some of them we found later on. Chaim Motzen found these letters when he was looking for family members of Karolina, and they were sent to us, and it was very difficult to not only to translate that was the easiest thing, but to find the correct German words because they were handwritten and very, very badly readable. A lot has been cut off for us. It is very sad for us Jews, wrote Mother Amalia in 1936 to Ida. 1 year later, the butcher's shop was closed, and in 1938 the family moved to Frankfurt, where they could live more anonymous. They settled in a so-called Judenhaus near Karolina's home. Judenhaus means that Jews were concentrated there. They tried to flee to the US, but failed. They had not enough money. They were dependent on the aid from the Jewish community. Here's a translation of one of these letters from 1939. If you wonder about the English, the family, Eisemann, the butcher's family, they were not very good, well educated. So they were speaking and writing quite a poor German. I have translated it into a poor English. I don't know whether this works correct. Frankfurt, March 26, 39. Dear brother-in-law and sister-in-law, together with the children, we received your letter and we were very glad that you are well. You would like to know if we have not done anything yet because of our children, so that they could go abroad. Believe it for sure that we have already set all the levels in motion and had been back to the Hilfsverein last week. I was told that we could only take the children abroad if they have a guarantor abroad, where the children are guaranteed either to England, to Switzerland, or even France, and it is not possible to bring the children abroad without the guarantee. Dear Jenny, Jenny was a family member who has emigrated to the United States years ago. Dear Jenny, Kindertransporte no longer go to America for a long time because everything goes by numbers. Only those people can go to America who have their numbers on it. The number is 7,000 and we have 22,590, which will take another 2 years, and it's bitter for us to have to wait that long. We could immigrate to the South America state if we have a guarantor who would deposit a certain amount for the entry visa. There were different people from Frankfurt who went to Bolivia and to Cuba. Their entry visa cost was $80 to $100. We would not care, there we go, if only a ship would come and take us. You know, we cannot risk for that from the cousin. He will not do that either. We are planning to go to China, but to Shanghai. But they do not give us any ship tickets, the Hilfsverein. Only those get cards who have been set a deadline. Only the front fighters do not have a deadline set who were in the war. And since I also was a front fighter, I did not get a deadline. We would have liked to use Shanghai as a transit camp, and from there we would like to go to America when it is our turn. From the request where the cousin made the last year, we have not helps abroad, that we could immigrate. Otherwise, nothing new. Want to close. Greetings to you and all to the children, your Simon. This cousin was the man who should pay the guarantee, which he didn't in the end. Not only the Eisemanns from Bad Erb came to Frankfurt. Also 15-year-old Ralph Eisemann came from Breisach. The son of Cantor Michael made a craft training to prepare for his emigration to that time Palestine. He was a regular guest of the Cohn family in the Tomasio Street. Then came the night of the 10th November 1938, the pogrom night. All the synagogues in Frankfurt were burned down. Members of the SA destroyed many Jewish shops in the city center. Nazis broke into the private homes of Jews and destroyed their property. Only in Frankfurt, more than 2,600 Jewish men were deported in concentration camps. All over Germany, more than 30,000 men were deported into concentration camps. We do not know if Richard Cohn, the father of Karolina, was among them, but we know that butcher Simon Eisemann was brought to concentration camp Buchenwald. Max Eisemann also was deported there. Max became free only in February 1939. His first address after that was his sister Else in Tomasio Street, the mother of Karolina, and he went there. And you know that Michael Eisemann was deported from Breisach to Dachau in these days, from where he came as a broken and as an ill man. In early 1939, he died in hospital. His sister Else Cohn visited his funeral. After all what had happened, more and more Jews tried to flee the country, but it became more and more difficult. One needed visa, transit visa, a ship's ticket, a German permit, the US quota system, an affidavit, a guarantor from the country you wanted to go, etc., etc. Altogether, this meant money, a lot of money. Karolina's family tried to find a way into the US. The same did Simon and Amalia Eisemann, and also Max Eisemann and his daughter Gertrude, whose mother had died from an illness, tried to get visa for the United States. All of them failed. They were imprisoned in Nazi Germany. And I will read another letter from the Eisemann family. It again goes to Jenny, the family member in the United States. And also it goes about Ida, from the family of the Eisemanns, who had gone to the States. My dear Jenny, yesterday I received the letter from dear Ida. The one letter is from January 19th and the other one from March 23rd. As we know from the letter, you have received a letter from the cousin. This letter is written 12th April 1940. You will have received our letters as well. The cousin in Baltimore, that's the one who should give this guarantee, the cousin in Baltimore just wants to give us the guarantee if he gets the guarantee that we pay the travel money ourselves. I was today at the Aid Society, that's this Hilfsverein, and the case was said. I received the following information. A written guarantee the Aid Society cannot give. I had been like that since. If the visa had approached to the aid organizations, ask the guarantor for the travel expenses. If he refused the guarantee, then the Hilfsverein pays. The money is later transferred back by foreign funds. How will that continue with the travel costs? The Help Society does not know. This is no reason that the cousin does not give the guarantee, I was told. Dear Jenny, concerning the Hilfsverein, you should go to the American committee and should put it up there in New York. The committee will then get in contact with the cousin in Baltimore that he provides the guarantee. Also, we have learned from the people that the American committee lends travel money and that one can repay that later one after the other. We know that the Karolina's family, the Cohn family, also received a permit to enter the US, but only after many years too late. Only Clara Eisemann, the widow of Michael Eisemann in Breisach, succeeded. She received a visa for the US and arrived 9th of August 1941 in New York City. And Ralph Eisemann, her son, took part in an illegal children's transport along the Danube with a destination Palestine. In Serbia, the whole party was stopped. The Second World War had begun. Most of the children were killed. Ralph Eisemann arrived in Eretz Israel after more than a year in 1941. His brother Ludwig was allowed to enter British Palestine in 1939, thanks to the help of a Jewish orphanage in Röderbergweg in Frankfurt, where he lived. Also Clara Eisemann, his mother, has lived there with this orphanage.
By the way, this orphan, where did they ship from? Which country they have been living to Israel? Was it Italy? Was it French?
I would suppose it was Italy, because that time it was usually Italy, from Trieste. But of course, it could have been, in theory, also another port. There were some ships going from Rotterdam as well. One can imagine that Karolina's family received these good and bad news. That Ludwig was allowed to emigrate. That Simon Eisemann's family failed. That Ralph Eisemann was on a ship on the way to Eretz Israel, but that he gave no signal anymore on the way to Eretz Israel. In 1940, the Cohn family of four was forced to open their assets to the authorities. The papers have survived in the Nazis and the war. Richard Cohn, the father of Karolina, wrote that there was no money left in his accounts. Richard was without a job. The rent for the apartment was 45 to 60 marks monthly. The family received help from the Jewish community of Frankfurt, altogether 103 marks and 20 pennies. According to the exchange rate of that time, this represented around 25 US dollars per month. Max Eisemann, the brother of Mother Else, lived with the Cohn family in the apartment in Thomasius Street that time. The space must have been very, very limited. And the anti-Semitism and the anti-Semitic laws, they grew in Nazi Germany. It was 1940, 1941, and Karolina was not allowed anymore to visit cinema because she was Jewish. She was probably attacked by Christian children when she went on her way to the Jewish school. She could not go to a children's theater because she was Jewish. She was not allowed to visit the doctor in case of illness, only a Jewish nurse. The family had to hand over their radio to the authorities. The family received less washing powder because they were Jewish. The family received less food. They could buy their things only in a special shop and at a special time. Karolina was named Zara by the Nazis, like all female Jews, while the men were named Israel. Starting September 1941, Karolina had to wear a Star of David, the so-called Judenstern. At around the same time, Jews were no longer allowed to leave the country. Just a second. For years, the Nazis had forced them to emigrate from Germany, but now in the war, when the Wehrmacht occupied more and more countries, anti-Semitic politics changed. The Hitler regime decided to kill all German and European Jews. In the beginning of the Holocaust, there was no Auschwitz extermination camp. There was no Treblinka, Majdanek or Sobibor, where the Jews from Poland were killed. When the deportations from German cities started in October 1941, the Jews were brought to the Jewish ghetto of Lodz, German Litzmannstadt in Poland, in old but regular train coaches. They were sent to Riga and Kaunas in the Baltic countries and to Minsk, the capital of Belarus, which was just occupied by the German Wehrmacht. Many of these people were murdered immediately after their arrival. Others starved in ghettos for months or for years. The family of Simon and Amalie Eisemann was deported to Kaunas in Lithuania at the end of November 1941. All Jews on board the train from Frankfurt were immediately shot after their arrival. Among them were the children of Simon and Amalie. Daughter Selma was 16 years old when she was murdered. Hermann became 12, Robert 9, and Irma 6 years. Altogether, 3,000 German Jews were killed in those days in Forum number 9 near Kaunas. No one survived. The only thing that survived were these letters from the family of Simon and Amalie to Meta and Irma, which we found in the United States in the West Coast. The Cohn family, meaning Karolina, her sister Gitta, mother Elsa, and father Richard, were deported with a second train for Jews leaving the east from Frankfurt am Main. It happened in the beginning of November 1941. All Jews were forced to the huge cellar of the market hall near the Frankfurt east of the town, where they were registered. Next morning, a train with 1,048 persons on board left Frankfurt with the destination of German-occupied Minsk in Belarus. Karolina took her small pendant with her on the voyage. There are no written informations about the Cohn family after they had left Frankfurt. But we know that the Jews from Frankfurt train were pressed in the Jewish ghetto of Minsk together with the local Jews. Trains from many German towns like Cologne, Hamburg, Berlin arrived in Minsk. All were full of Jews. The ghetto was overcrowded. There was not enough food, no medicine, no proper hospital, not enough heating. And the winter was terrible cold, up to minus degrees. The Jews had to do slave work for the Germans, even children like Karolina. Many of them died after a few weeks of hunger and cold, and many others were murdered by the SS. But what happened to Karolina? How did her pendant came to Sobibor, a camp hundreds of miles west of Minsk in occupied Poland? We do not know for sure, but we have a strong supposition. In 1943, that's 2 years after Karolina and her family had been deported from Frankfurt to Minsk, in 1943 the German Wehrmacht lost more and more ground in the Soviet Union. That was the reason why the SS ordered the Minsk ghetto to be dissolved. That means to kill all the Jews who had survived until that time, except those who could be used as slave workers in future. For the Jews of Frankfurt, who had been around 1,000 when they arrived in November 1941, maybe 50 or 80 were still alive. Among them must have been Karolina Cohn. On 14th September 1943, a deportation train left Minsk. On board were around 780 Jews from Germany and from Belarus. The train took its way to Majdanek, the concentration camp in the east of German-occupied Poland near Lublin. From there, the prisoners were sent to different other camps. Some came to labor camps in Poland, others to concentration camps with slave work inside Germany. Altogether, exactly 10 out of 1,048 Jews from Frankfurt who had been sent to Minsk in 1941 survived the war in these camps and were freed by the Allied forces in 1945. 10 out of 1,048. One transport from Majdanek went to the death camp of Sobibor. On board were persons who could no longer work as slaves because they were too weak, maybe because of the long train ride in freight wagons from Minsk to Majdanek. It seems that one of these passengers was Karolina Cohn. Her pendant was found in 2016 at a place in Sobibor where in 1943 the hair of female prisoners was shaved by other prisoners. This was done in a wooden barrack shortly before the women were taken to the gas chambers. It seems that Karolina lost her pendant there, which fell under the plank floor and remained in the earth for more than 70 years. This is Karolina's story. I'm sorry that I could not tell you a more optimistic story, but history is as it is, and it's important to know this history, especially in Germany. For 80 years, Karolina was forgotten. Now we have 4 stumbling blocks laying in front of the house, Tomasius Street number 10 in Frankfurt. On these stones it is written that Karolina, Gitta, Else and Richard have lived at this place and that they were murdered by the Nazis. In November 2017, when the stumbling stones were laid, the Jewish Claims Conference invited family members of Karolina from all over the world to Frankfurt. During the event, the mayor of Frankfurt spoke. Journalists covered the event and sent their news all over the world. remember. And now we have some men and women all over the world who know that Karolina was a young girl from Frankfurt am Main. Well, thank you very much for your patience. Thank you very much that you came to Breisach. And I wish you a wonderful day. Thanks. If you have any questions, don't hesitate, ask me. I will try to answer them, but you know, I don't have my archive with me, so if there are specific questions for ships or special routes, maybe I can't answer them. I will try to answer them by email later on.
How do you spell Karolina's last name?
C-O-H-N, Cohn. A very usual name in Germany, and also all over the world, I think so, for Jews, and for non-Jews as well. Yes?
I'm curious about the kinder transports. Who in general arranged them? And were they just from Germany, or did they take place in other places?
Well, we have to differentiate. We have the transports to the death camps and to the ghettos from Germany.
No, I mean the ones that help children particularly receive.
The children's transports.
Yes.
The children's transport, that was a reaction from the so-called pogrom night, Reichskristallnacht, 9th November 1938, from Western countries like England, Great Britain, UK, Sweden, Belgium, the Netherlands and France. They allowed especially children, unoccupied children, to come to them for a specific time to stay there so that they could be helped. The idea was they would stay there maybe for 1 or 2 years that time and then go back to their country after the Nazi question was solved. We know it didn't happen that way. And that was the reason why only the children without their parents were allowed to enter these countries. But that was possibly only until the beginning of the Second World War, of course, because after that, these were enemy states, and it wasn't allowed to enter an enemy state from Germany, because Germany was in war with all these countries.
So, and what age children went on those? I mean, you know, how young, how old? I
remember there was the maximum age of 16, if I'm correct, and I think it started around 3 or 4 years. So there are cases of children who just became 17 and who were not allowed to go with the children's transport. But I think we also have to keep in mind it was a very hard and very difficult thing for the parents to send their young children to a foreign country which they did not know. We know that at that time Europe was very more provincial than today. The German Jews, they haven't been to England and to France and to other countries. Usually they only have been to Germany. And now they were asked, send your children somewhere, you've never been there, you don't know the language, you don't know nothing. And of course these, at that time in 1940 or 1938, 1939, the German Jews didn't know how the story ended, that the Nazis decided to murder them all. At that time still some Jews thought and believed maybe it becomes better again and we can survive in a way we don't know.
Thank you.
Klaus, you mentioned one family member who undertook agricultural training in preparation for Aliyah, immigration to Israel. Do you have any knowledge of what the training center was where he went to? There were a number of what they called hachshara farms, and this particular one, any knowledge?
Yes, there was a hachshara training center in Germany, but it's very detailed. There were so many, I have to read half of the book to know it now, because I don't know it by some other time, exactly.
I have a more generic question about the state of mind and the atmosphere. I guess I'm referring mostly to the early years of the Nazi regime. What was the view of the German civilization, civilians? Did they hate or did not like or were indifferent to the Jew? Was there any resumption against the Jew community, or they were considered an equal, day-to-day neighbors or friends or merchant partners? So I'm trying to figure out whether this was also driven by some feeling from the community.
I think there is no simple answer to your question. Of course, there was a certain amount of Germans who were purely anti-Semitic in their mind and who hated Jews, and who believed that the Nazis were doing right what they did. On the other hand, there was maybe a major group of people who tried. They just wanted to live their life without becoming involved in any politics. So we don't know what they really believed. This majority of people, of course, they were not against the Nazis, but they were also not in favor of the Nazis. And there was another small group which was purely against the Nazis and who was tried to do something against the Nazis. We know that it was very difficult to fight the Nazis at that time, because you could send to prison and you could go to the concentration camp and even killed. But I wouldn't say that the Germans were all anti-Semitic, and I wouldn't say that it was the Nazis and on one hand and the Germans on the other hand. No, there were many Germans who were in favor of all of this. You have to think, for the whole system which was working with these concentration camps, with the labor camps, with the deportation trains, with all these systems, with the bureaucrats, there were more than 100,000 Germans who were integrated in this system and who knew exactly what was happening that time, who knew what was happening to the Jews, and that the majority of the Jews, of the German population, also, if they wanted, they could knew what happened that time. Even in the newspapers there were reports about concentration camps in Germany. So, of course, there was not a newspaper calling the Jews were all killed. But if you could read between the lines, you knew what was happening. You wouldn't. I think the people didn't like to believe it. They closed their ears, but many of them then knew what was happening.
I think we have to realize that the anti-Semitic movement started in 1862, not in 1933. When the Jew, relatively to granting equal rights to the Jews who had fought for it for decades and centuries. So this was achieved, and an anti-Semitic party was founded right away. So this was long before 1933. So then came World War I. Germany lost World War I. The Jews were accused. Then came the big crisis, end of the 1923, 1929, the economic disasters. And there's an interesting study which was done. I'm missing the last name, but I can send it to you. Theodor, he gave out with Goebbels allowed him to do that from America, questionnaires. Why did I become a Nazi? So this was very early 1933. The originals are at Stanford University. You can go and see them. There's a book, a big book about it, and the answers were not, I hate Jews. The Jews played, or hating Jews played a minor role in the answers, why am I a Nazi? So we can draw from that the Nazi propaganda, very, very, very dominant after January 1933, worked up this hate. I don't say there was no hate before, but so we have to go at it, I think, very to look at the details. So I want to encourage you to want to know more about this study that was done in evaluating all these questionnaires. So young men and women wrote handwritten answers. That's very interesting. If you like to, I can give you the name of the Theodore Bababam, but all the answers written in German, the originals are at Stanford University, and there are studies done. I find that very interesting. Ralph, and I don't know if you know that, Michelle and Sandy, Ralph's daughters. Ralph came here in 1998 and 1999, and he had in his wallet a picture of Alfred Weil. I don't know if you shared that with him. I think he carried it with him since they were separated. So Alfred exactly is one of those children who was not taken into the Kindertransport to Switzerland, but his two younger sisters who I was able to get to know. They both died now. So this was always mentioned, that up to a certain age, and he was just a little bit older, and so he was killed with his parents in Majdanek, and he wrote letters from there. The parents were already killed. He didn't mention that. He wrote letters to his two smaller sisters in Switzerland, and as a big brother saying, please go to school, please learn, please, work on getting forward, like a really wonderful, warm-hearted brother. He didn't mention a word about the situation he was in. And so from the date, the last letter the sisters got in Switzerland, you can guess when he was murdered. So then there was silence. And so I just wanted, because Ralph introduced us very early to Alfred Weil and his friendship, and Alfred is standing at the Bar Mitzvah in the garden of the Blue House where we met yesterday. That's clearly to see. He's standing there alone. We have the picture in our archive. So there, I think there's a unique chance that from the very early research we did, we can now go back. We talked about it with Eyal, who's very ready to help with the research, to some questions we couldn't quite answer, be it the Kladovo transport that Ralph was on, or other questions. So I think we have lots of input now by getting together, by all of you being here, in doing more work together, which will be helpful. And I think that Klaus Hillenbrand's book is very helpful to fill in many, many blanks. And I didn't know that there were archival findings in the Frankfurt archives, which is interesting. So thank you very much, but I don't want to take too much time. It was another question.
Thank you. I can answer the question of Odi Trom right now, because I found in my own book what I was writing at that time about Ralph Eisemann in last years in Germany. He had a crafts education in Frankfurt. He was learning Schlosser. Anybody knows what Schlosser of English is? Locksmith, yes. He was learning locksmith in Frankfurt. That was a time when he also was a regular visitor to the Cohn family in Tomasia Street, but he stayed in a special home with the other young Jews who were learning there. And later on he came to Gut Gieringshof near Fulda. That was the place for Hachshara, for Hachshara place, exactly, for people learning how to survive when they are in Eretz Israel. And from there he took this terrible ship from Vienna along the Danube, which should go up to the Black Sea, and from the Black Sea to Palestine, but which was stopped in Serbia because the Second World War had broken out. And there Ralph and all the other hundreds of young Jews from Central Europe were kept there, and Ralph managed to survive this place, I don't know exactly how, and arrived in Eretz Israel after more than 1 year, but many of his compatriots, they were killed there in Serbia.
Your father, great-grandfather, for the first time talked about what happened to him in 1999. Were you in my living room? You listened to him? Was he talking in German? Right?
Yeah.
I think your grandmother tried to translate a bit. So that was the first time that he talked about his story. So Ludwig, his brother, was better protected by joining the transport with his uncle Isidor, the director of the Jewish orphanage in Frankfurt. And Ralph got into this with 1,200 people. There were about 200 youngsters on the boat. And again, he was very, very lucky because of his date of birth, because there was a similar limit, all older than so-and-so. And the Germans started to invade and murder in March 1941 in Serbia. And so all the adult people, mostly Viennese Jews on the boat, those who had not committed suicide, and your father always mentioned that at least 50 people around him, whom he already knew, by being together, by spending the days or having to spend the days together. And all the adults were murdered, the women in one way, the men in another way. But then there was a day that the certificates came to Palestine just for the group of young people of about, I think, 150, 200, and he was among them. And then they could leave the group and were taken to Palestine. There's research done, and I think the ultimate answer to the question why the many efforts to release this large group of people who had gotten stuck in Serbia and save them, why this was not, they were not erfolgreich. What is it? Successful, yeah. The Mossad was involved in other institutions, so there were efforts to try to save these people, but only this small group with your father could leave. And okay, so there are books about it also, probably also in English, and now there's the internet. We didn't start with the internet 25 years ago, and we can try to recover that story also.
I wanted to ask you if you're familiar with the man Nicholas Vinton. Does the name sound familiar? Nicholas Vinton? Anybody? Nicholas Vinton? Winton.
Yes, with England.
Winton. Okay. I heard the story, a beautiful story, a true story. I just wanted to share that when you said kinder transport. Nicholas Vinton, I'm not sure exactly what year it was, but he was an accountant. And he was all asked by friends, he was not married at the time, he was asked by friends to participate in a very important mission. Because he was an accountant, they knew that he would be able to keep excellent records. And they asked him to keep these excellent records of the children, 568 children approximately. And at that time, they knew something was happening, but they really weren't sure what was going to be. So parents were asked to give up their children, and have them go in the Kindertransport to England, and they had families in England. Nicholas Vinton kept excellent records of the pictures, the records of every child and where the child went, to which family, how much money was given, and he also was excellent at forging records. So he was able to give them all passports and whatever. The most important thing is that we'll talk about the children afterwards. Through the years, Nicholas Vinton married, but never mentioned to his wife what he did. One day she found in a chest up in the attic all these pictures of these children, and also the money that was expended, and we don't know whether he was Jewish or not. We think he was, but no one really knows that. And so, years later, she got involved with the television show, if you remember, This Is Your Life. Do you remember This Is Your Life? And they got Nicholas Vinton on this TV show. And they were explaining different people in his life and whatever, and then someone, I guess, who was the person in This Is Your Life? Do you remember who was the moderator? This Is Your Life? Okay. He said, I want you to know, Mr. Winton, that two of the children from the Kindertransport are sitting on either side of you, because he's never met the children. And they right away, they put their arms around him because he saved their lives. And then they said, everyone in this audience are members of the children that you have saved. And there have been 5,000 people that have come out of these 568 children. Many of them were doctors, lawyers, actors, whatever. Some of them converted to other religions because of the parents that they went to. Other of them stayed Jewish. All the children and grandchildren came from this. My rabbi that I share the bima with went to visit Nicholas Winton in, I guess it was just a few years ago before he passed away. I believe he was 105. This story stayed with me. It's amazing what the difference that one person can make. And again, his wife never knew what he did.
Yes.
I have a question for you and also Christiana. There's so much information and so much research that you referred to that went into the book. And the research, Christiana, that you've done to explore the histories of all of these families with such detail and so much information. What can you tell us about the sources that you used, and what was the greatest source of information? There are a lot of tales, and there's a lot of, the Germans kept incredible records, I believe, but where did you get all the information that enabled you to piece everything together and to explain everything that happened to many people as a result of this book? And same for Christiana. It really is quite remarkable what you have been able to piece together, and I'm curious.
Thank you. Well, I will try to answer first before Christiana. With these archives, it's quite difficult. The Nazis have tried to destroy all their documents concerning the Holocaust at the end of the Second World War, because they knew that it was a terrible crime, and so they were burning really many masses of documents. So many things you won't find anymore. But of course you find some things. As an example, when the Jews were sent to the camps, to the concentration camps, the German Jews had to fill out a huge form of 8 or 10 pages about what were their amounts, how much money they have, where are their accounts, if they have houses, property, etc., etc. All this was written down because all these things belonged to the German Reich in that moment that the Jews took the border from Germany in the direction of Poland, as an example. That was a bureaucratic thing. Now, all these forms, they were stored at the Oberfinanzpräsident. I can't translate Oberfinanzpräsident. That's a bureaucratic thing in Germany. And it was forgotten to burn them at the end of the Second World War. Most of these documents, not all, some were burned, but some not. So you can find now at special archives, for example in Potsdam, that's a town near to Berlin, all these documents from the Oberfinanzpräsidenten, where all the Jews were writing down what was their property just a few days before they were deported. That is just an example. You have another example, I'm sure.
I have to rethink because at a certain point all my notes and what was written up about your family, it's in a stack. I have to put it in order, but I will do now and revisit all the notes and see what we can draw out of it. So there's a lot that happens by coincidence and serendipity, a word that I was not in my workshops for a long time. When Lauren and Elizabeth and Kim came with Ralph and B, and you stayed here, I didn't know what you did, but Ralph and I went to Woche in Bödigheim, and so I got to know more of that piece of history, where Ayala next time he comes wants to go. And I tell you something, we went to the cemetery where his grandparents, Mark's, Clara's parents were buried, and it's a cemetery with probably 800 stones and overgrown with ivy. And I don't know how, but finally we stood at the overgrown tombstones of his grandparents, and we just went like this and this, and here was Abraham Marx and his wife. So I have a picture. I'll show you, and I will digitalize it and send it to you because you want to go there. So it's pieces, but now we have to maybe explain to the Eisemanns and to the others that the main focus of the research has not been in the last 10 years on your family, and their history is marked by their belonging to a group of Jews connected to Jewish organizations. You know, they were not like mainstream Breisach Jewish citizens. They were deported to Gurs. And since Uli Tom is here, I hope that as a result of today we can increase our efforts to do research on the story. How did the Nazis manage to secretly prepare a deportation of 6,500 people in one morning arrested? In a geographic area between the Swiss border and Heidelberg, 2,000 in Mannheim, 65 in Breisach, one Dr. Johanna Geismar in the Black Forest, in Freiburg, 300 people. So how did they prepare that, 1940? We still don't know, and I think we have to go to Strasbourg, to the archive, because the Gauleiter's residence was not in Karlsruhe anymore. He had to move just a couple of weeks before that. And so the archive German documents with a French framework. So the French archivists will not easily begin to read in that material. So we have to go there and hopefully find the answers to a question that should really interest everyone, not only in this area, because that was so relatively successful that from there on a certain structure of how to go about deporting information, the questionnaires that you mentioned, how do you make it more perfect and perfect and perfect so it goes more smoothly, you know? So we'll form a group. Tomorrow morning, when we meet at the Synagogenplatz with the politicians and the public, I want to hand over to Eyal a set of papers and to Scott another set of papers. The set of papers for Scott is the original copies of the handwritten documentation that Hans Blum did 1936-37 about the tombstones on the old cemetery, and we'll ask him to help us with our research, and Eyal will get a copy of the 28-page paper that a doctor wrote about his experiences in Dachau concentration camp, who knew Michael Eisemann there. He's mentioning him 2-3 times, and we'll work on it together to translate it, and it will give a lot of information what these men went through. It's not easy to read, I have to tell you. So that's Dr. Blumenthal. It's in the archive of Dachau.
Uli wanted to say something. A big opportunity was missed after the war. The plenipotentiary was responsible, one of the two, for the Goers deportation. Gauleiter, what's his name? Wagner, was put on trial in Strasbourg. That was a tribunal, and he was sentenced to death. They failed to ask him about Goers. If they had asked him then, we would have the documentation from the trial, because the prosecutor would have charged him. That was missed. So we have to turn to secondary sources, as Christiane says. And one big source is when the idea of the deportation originated in the Foreign Office in Berlin. That sort of research has been done. The documentation is relatively complete. But one word on a more personal note, what prompts this type of persistent research Klaus has been doing and others are doing? It's usually oral history and meeting descendants. So your accounts matter tremendously. We follow up on your accounts. Julie's right next to me. Julie and her mother and her sister told me stuff that prompted research, and it's ongoing. It's not ticking a box, it's an obligation.
I just have a question, which the Jews from all the different towns, Breisach, Lörrach, Offenburg, they were all brought to Freiburg to be deported. So they all left. They all were on trains to Freiburg, and then that number. So the number that was given, that was just the Jews that were taken exactly from Freiburg, but they all were gathered into Freiburg before they were deported to Goers. Was that?
Well, we've done during the last 3 years some research which is never finished, because we wanted to identify where we're not talking now about the Palatinate Jews in Saarland, but about the Baden Jews, where the Baden Jews, more than 5,600, were forced into the 7 trains which took them to Comte de Goers. And we have an animated video, 2.5 minutes, and there you can watch what we until now found out. Okay, I will not describe it. They all went through Freiburg, but sometimes the train passed, one train stopped shortly. The Freiburg Jews were put in 2 different trains, and one train left a full day later. And these are all the details that you have to be interested in to recover what we don't know yet from archival source, as Uli said. We don't have the original documents of the planning, so we do it from histories people told, and we try to we check if that's plausible. Okay, so look at what we send you, or you look on our website, you find it. It's only 2.5 minutes, but you probably will have to watch it 3 or 4 times. Very short text. If you tell me, give it to me in English, we'll translate it. Now it's only in German, and so we hope to inspire more research on how was this possible, you know, and the Gürs was not decided when they went through Freiburg. They went all across the Breisach bridges, 7 trains, and this is one reason why we are so interested. The 7 trains were sent across the Breisach bridge because it was the only bridge at that time that was intact as a train bridge. See? And Adolf Hitler was 3 months before, 9 days, with the staff, like with the high-ranked Nazis in the area, in the wonderful Black Forest, in a Führerhauptquartier, and from there he visited empty Strasbourg. Now Strasbourg was evacuated as a French city, Jews and non-Jews. Strasbourg was empty when Adolf Hitler, Speer, andere visited Strasbourg. So then they probably thought, here in Strasbourg are also 10,000 Jews who had to leave Strasbourg, like the Christians, as evacuation. Do we want to let them come back? There are all these apartments. What's in there? Piano, silver, furniture, you know? So the Jews who were not, the Alsatian Jews who were not evacuated, they were not allowed, they had to go to Vichy France, and the others who were evacuated were not allowed to come back. So this was a matter of 14, 15 days after the armistice that these laws were passed. So we have to take in consideration all these details to really understand the story better. And I don't say that's the end of the research. And I hope, as Uli, that the Lörrach historians will join, and we are a stronger force if we do it together.
Thanks. Concerning research in archives, of course, things have become, in certain cases, easier since we have the internet right now. It is easier to look for specific persons. And I just want to give you an advice. If you are interested to research on your own about family members, as an example, the Arolsen archives, which were very, very much closed also to historians. You couldn't get these documents, you had to wait for 5, 10 years or even longer. They are open right now, and these Arolsen archives, they keep millions of files about survived and not survived Jews. They keep all the registers from the DP centers, etc. in the 1940s, and they have opened their archives to the public. Nearly all documents now, they're on the internet, you can get them, you can just go to Arolsen archives online and look for a specific person, write the name of the person, and maybe you're lucky you will find something, maybe you find absolutely nothing. You don't know that in advance, of course, but one can try. In the moment, what I'm doing currently is a study about an orphanage in Berlin. I found the names of around 450 persons who were in that orphanage during the 30s and the 40s. It was closed in 42, and the children were all murdered in Auschwitz. And to these 450 persons, you find lots of material also in these Arolsen archives. So it's not the end of the story, but it makes things easier now. if you want to study yourself on things. You needn't have a special education to look on these archives, I think so. You can do it yourself if you like. Of course, it's not the only thing for this small book about Karolina. I think I was in 20 or 30 different archives, also in Karlsruhe, in Freiburg, etc., etc. But Arolsen was a very important point.
My name is Rosita Dienst-Demuth, and I have been researching about students of my school, Jewish students of the mandatory school for Jewish children who were not allowed to attend their schools in the whole southern Baden area anymore. So, Mr. Hillenbrand, I want to thank you very, very much for this great, impressive research about Caroline. 1 out of 1,500,000 murdered children. I want to point out the more than 16 children of our school, the Lessing School in Freiburg, that only 4 were murdered out of more than 16, and 26 were deported to Gurs and all survived because there were so many courageous people in southern France and organizations, Swiss organizations and French and Jewish and non-Jewish organizations who saved the children and hid them in, like Ronja, in children's homes or on the farm, or help them to cross the border to Switzerland. But the sad story about it is, of course, that many survived without their parents and relatives and friends. But because all survived from our school, we had this tree for silent heroes planted on our schoolyard to point this out, that courageous people can change the world, like Ronja's family. And some of our children also were rescued through the Kindertransport 1 to Great Britain, 1 out of 10,000, as I know. And several from Breisach, they had the chance to be rescued through a Kindertransport to Switzerland. But now I come back to the very, very sad stories again. One child of our school, his name is Alfred Geismar. His grandparents come from Breisach. And Alfred Geismar, with his older sister, Else Pripis, born Geismar from Emmendingen, they attended our school in Freiburg, and both were listed on a document that they are supposed to be released through the Kindertransport to Switzerland. The older sister, who turned 100 years old this year, Else Geismar, the only survivor of the whole family, she pointed it out that her younger brother had seen this document. And now I know that this document really exists, but the list of the children having the big luck to be part of the children's transport to Switzerland was changed again. So these two people were not part of it anymore. The end was that Else Geismar survived 3 years of Theresienstadt, but the little brother tried very hard to survive in Berlin, being prepared in a group for emigration to Palestine, and the company of Siemens wanted to force him for forced labor, and so he had to go every 6 weeks to Auschwitz to build up the company's factories for using the labor of the poor people being brought to Auschwitz. So then he came back all the time after these days again of his mission to Berlin, and when he was on the list of deportating people to Auschwitz, he committed suicide. So that was the sad story. One other sad story of this 1,500,000 children who were murdered. Thank you for your work.
Thank you. I think we have to keep in mind that Hitler did not won. He lost. You are here. You have survived, or your family has survived, and Hitler has lost the war. A friend of mine from Australia, he died some years ago. He was the one who was dancing in Auschwitz as a 19-year-old survivor. He was dancing in Auschwitz to tell the Nazis, today's Nazis, and the public, I've won the war, I've won the Holocaust, I'm the one who survived. I will keep the story in myself, and I will give this story further on to the next generation. And you, the Nazis, you have lost this fight. I think this is important because we have to talk so much about dead people right now, about people being murdered, about very, very sad stories like the story of Karolina. But I think also we have one positive aspect we have to keep in mind.
And Klaus, just to reflect a minor anecdote from the recent times, it was just written emphasizing the Israeli press out of the $100 billion of the German government attempt to rebuild their army. They have a $3 or $4 billion deal buying some Iron Dome technology from Israel. Yeah. So the very people that were about to be terminated by the German are now providing Germany the technology to defend itself. So this is the unique turn of history.
It's not bad, isn't it? Yes.
Yeah, it's
nice.
Good.
I hope you agree that I say the closing words. We have a little guest here, 5 years old. She definitely looks like she wants to do something else, and maybe some of us too. I want to thank Klaus Hillenbrand from the heart that he took the long trip to Breisach, and it's a privilege to have you here and listen to you. And I want to say goodbye to 3 very important people who are leaving today. Ronja Beecher, who is in the newspaper today, page 3, not in ours, but in the Freiburg pager. 2 days ago, you were speaking here to the Breisach students, and yesterday to the Blessingschule students, Andrea and Judy. And so to make Arolsen work well, I agree completely with what Klaus Hillenbrand says, for this huge archive that finally opened the doors to work well, they need us, they need you and us to point out, look at these photos, are these your relatives on the deportation photos of Lörrach? So there stand brothers and sisters of your grandmother lined up to be taken to Worms, and we can clearly see them. And so I want to thank especially Andrea, who takes pictures while she should sit at the Seder table, with relatives and goes to the apartment of a relative because there are lots of photos that are of complete interest to us. And thank you so much for doing all this investigative work besides the Seder table. We say goodbye to the three of you, and thank you for being with us, coming and giving so much to so many people. And I learned just that part of the Eisemann family, Sandy and her husband, her daughter and son-in-law, they will leave tomorrow and will have to say goodbye, maybe after a cup of coffee now. So thank you all for all those who are not directly involved in our week to come and to listen to Klaus Hillenbrand. And we really look forward to doing a lot more research work and come up with new insights. We hope you have a very good return home. And Ronja is in touch with her husband, who is even 10 years older, almost 100 years old, who had to stay at home, who's probably pretty waiting for you to open the door and to be back home. So thank you so much. Thank everyone else for being with us this morning. Okay, goodbye.